Hey everybody, it's Eric alongside Rod coming to you live from Indy at the Big Ten tournament to talk about MSU's win over the Oregon Ducks 74-64 and their upcoming opponent, the Wisconsin Badgers. Since we're between sessions, we're going to be lightning fast in this post-game and pre-game analysis. Before we begin, quick question to you, Rod. What do you call 3.14-foot long snake? It's a
Um,
python. Happy Pi Day, everyone.
okay.
All right. So let's start talking about the Spartans game against the Ducks. Pretty resounding win where they led comfortably by 10 at halftime. They came back, allowed the Ducks to get back in it, and then got down, I think, 1 point, and then blitzed back out to double-digit lead and pretty much held there through the end of the game. I think got down as close as 7, but it never really felt like the game was really much in doubt. So a nice win for Michigan State to start out in the Big Ten tournament.
Yeah, it was a weird game because for one that seemed to be mostly under control. I mean, even those brief periods where Oregon held the lead, you never felt like they had, enough momentum to really make it tough. You always felt like Michigan State was in control of this thing, at least I did. But Michigan State didn't play anything close to their A game.
No.
Uh, so I guess that's good news that you go out and you beat a good team that's probably going to be a six, I think, six seed come selection Sunday. And you handle that team by double digits. They led by as much as 16. I really thought when MSU pushed it out to 16 that it was going to turn into a blowout.
Yeah, I agree.
Credit to Oregon for keeping it, within reason. But as you say, they once that happened, they never really got any closer than two to three possession, I guess three possessions. And Michigan State came through to the finish line relatively easily. And again, in a day where they were they were good enough, but they weren't great. We saw some of the things that you would expect to see from a team that isn't at their sharpest playing the first game in a tournament, right? That we
Yeah.
we talked about that. But all in all, I think a very welcome win for Michigan State to do so without really getting pushed incredibly hard. Uh, Nice to see the 3-point shooting really show up. We'll see if that continues in the postseason, but that was a welcome sight. And they got enough good basketball from enough people for enough stretches that you could feel reasonably good about this as a quarterfinal.
Yeah, and I think, you look at standouts for the game. Obviously, the difference between this game and the one at Breslin Center is Jeremy Fears was inactive in that game from, I think, he had the
Yeah,
flu. I don't know if Booker played either, but either way,
he didn't.
huge difference for Fears playing this game and in taking on Shellstad, who was our
Oh
player to
yeah,
keep in the gutter. I mean, he was relatively ineffective despite being very, very physical. I mean, the whole Oregon team is extremely physical that first half, but it wasn't enough. And that was, I think, that was one of the differences in that. And then probably the other one to talk about is Coen Carr's game.
yeah. So we'll start with the defense. It's a funny thing. Tom Izzo was actually really happy about his defense, and yet Oregon did shoot 47% from the floor. So it didn't always feel like a vintage Michigan State defensive performance, but the second half was absolutely that. And the job they did on Shellstead throughout the game was absolutely that. And you start that discussion with Jeremy Fears. You're absolutely right. I thought he was relentless. Big difference between the first game and this one that Michigan State had him. I also thought Jeremy was really good on offense too,
Yep.
pushing, probing, keeping the pace up. Michigan State certainly didn't live in transition in this game, but he was good there. Led them in assists with 5 to 2 turnovers. But you started his game, I think, with the defense. And Trey Holloman also did a nice job against Shellstead. And then from there, it was a variety of people. Jaden Akins would get him some. Some of the other guys, obviously, on switches would occasionally guard him. But I think primarily you start with Jeremy and then Trey. And we called out Shellstead as the guy to keep in the gutter for a reason. He's a guy who makes them go. And if he's only scoring 8 points, that's 5 below his seasonal average. It's going to be a long day for
Yeah.
Oregon. It's going to be tough for them to win.
Yeah, it's kind of funny because the first game we had Biddle as the player to keep the gutter, and he
We
ended
were
up not
right
playing a whole
on,
lot.
weren't we?
He ended up not
We
playing
were
a lot and
dialed
getting foul
in.
trouble. And then this time we had Shilstead, and he's the one that kept the gutter. And Biddle kind of went off and had a
But
big game.
that's what I'm saying. In the first game, we had Biddle identified
Yeah,
as the guy to limit, and they did. And then today was Shellstead, and they did that. So we, for whatever reason, we were really dialed into Oregon this year.
it's very flattering that the Michigan State coaching staff follows our advice.
Yeah,
That's really
yeah.
really kind
Thanks,
of nice.
guys.
All right, moving on to the player to keep in the gutter, brought to you, of course, by the Brothers Just Your Gutters. You need gutter work done, call these guys. You can get a hold of them at our support page at the Final Fours on the schedule.com/support. 10% off if you mention Final Four when you get your estimate. Whether you're on the east side or the west side of the state, Kurt or Greg can hook you up. And so, player, as I mentioned, the Michigan State needed to keep in the gutter was Jackson Shellstead. He was, well, kept in the gutter. He is 4-11 from the field, 0 for 5 from three. Didn't have a free throw attempt, which is a little surprising too. 8 points, 1 rebound, 2 assists, a turnover, no blocks, no steals. He was pretty much partly in the first half because of foul trouble. He got two fairly quick fouls, but after that, when even when he was in, he was really not very effective and got a little bit done, but it was very almost at the end of the game when it didn't matter.
Well, that's it. He got cheap baskets, and
Yeah,
I don't mean that to be completely dismissive, but he got a couple. He got one where he leaked out in transition, and got a no contest. So even the 8 points he got weren't really 8 points. I mean, Michigan State shut him down. That's the bottom line. And when you do that, when an opposing point guard is the key guy for the opposition offense, and you limit him the way Michigan State did, you're going to be tough to beat. And that's exactly how it went. So once again, we've talked about this before, man. Michigan State has got a very strong track record in terms of limiting the guys that we identify. And that's not a credit to us.
no,
It's usually fairly obvious who that player is, right?
right, yeah.
And like it'll be fairly obvious who that is tomorrow. And yet Michigan State has an amazingly good track record. I can't off the top of my head have they out and out missed? Some guys have had better days than others, but it's hard to think of somebody we had identified who just went off.
No, I think you're right. I think the most someone gets is maybe about their average, or
But
maybe
usually
a
it's
bucket
it's
more.
without efficiency if they
Right,
do that.
that's true.
That's kind of
Yeah,
the point. Yeah.
yeah,
Even when that happens, it's taking them a lot of shots to get there. So I'm sure there's somebody along the course of the season who's done that, but boy, it's hard to think of them at this
yeah. Well,
stage.
certainly in the last 8 games against these all these quad one opponents, there haven't been any that
Yeah.
recall in this winning streak. So,
Yep.
I mean, not surprising, I guess, you're keeping the best player down. You're winning these games. So that brings us to Who Cleans Glass Best, brought to you the Squeegee Squad of Grand Rapids. Friends, make sure your windows are clean. Head on over to the Squeegee Squad of Grand Rapids. They can do great pricing, great professionals. They can do pretty much whatever needs to be done, whether it's a residence or a business. They can keep those windows clean. You get 15% off. You mentioned Final Four when you get your estimate. You can get that at tffinots.com/support. And in that competition, it is now 17 to 10. If the best hope we have is that I have to win every single one from here on to the end of the season, assuming Michigan State makes to the national championship game to
Right.
beat you.
We
So
we are in. This was close though, wasn't it? Wasn't it
it
8-7?
was we were both. I mean, both of us had, yeah. I think it was 8 to 6. I had 6 because Kohler had 4 and Akins had 3. Yes, I was 7, and you had Cooper who had 5, and you had Richardson who had
Richardson
3.
3.
So yeah, you
Yep.
went 8 to 7. But of course, Carr just had 8 all by himself.
Yeah.
So had either
Yeah.
picked
And
him,
I'm guessing I certainly thought about him, and I'm sure you did too.
yeah,
But yeah, that's worth mentioning though, man. Coen
yeah,
Carr, because we didn't really talk about him as an individual. I mean, obviously, Jace Richardson had a big second half. And I thought had an uncharacteristically off start to the game.
yep.
He was frustrated. It just didn't seem to me to be quite in sync the way he normally is. He set an incredibly high bar with that. But in the second half, he really settled in and was great. But Cohen, man, just energy plays, and I think the way he rebounded was emblematic of that. Just attacking the ball, and not. I think he had one dunk.
Yeah, he had that air ball dunk where he
Yeah,
just kind
yeah,
of
he
came in
missed a
and
couple.
backboard.
And
Yeah.
and so it wasn't the normal kind of energizer game we see from him. But that doesn't mean he didn't energize Michigan State. He did some great defensive play, just all around. He seemed to be everywhere.
Yeah, had the
So
3-2,
hats,
which is not surprising too when you guy who's that active. They seem to
yeah,
always get those balls kind of fall for them, it seems like.
yep, absolutely. You the basketball gods smile on you. You kind of get what you deserve. And that was a big shot early because I think that was well. We'll talk about it when we get into the keys about Oregon and their defensive approach, but that sort of forced them out of the zone early.
Yeah.
I thought him
Well,
hitting that shot. But anyway,
and
we
this
can
is,
return to that.
and Carr's obviously you always talk about X factors. He's certainly a guy you could see as being someone important in a big deep run in the NCAA tournament. And he,
100%.
right?
I say this, or I used to say it a lot when Michigan State was making these runs regularly. To me, especially once you get second weekend and beyond, oftentimes the difference because you're almost always talking about two very good teams, right?
Sure. Yeah.
Just you can occasionally get a team going on a run that's a fluke, but usually it's two good teams. Oftentimes, in my opinion, the difference is if you've got a guy who can make that, 95th or 99th percentile play, by which I mean a guy who can go out there on a floor filled with high level college basketball players, usually including some future pros, can go out and make a play that nobody else on that court can make. You saw Coen Carr do that a couple times in this game.
Yes,
He just got
absolutely.
up higher than everybody, including 7 footers, you know, and on some of those rebounds. And sometimes that's what it takes. That is the example that always comes to my mind, although there are lots of them. I just have visions of Brandon Dawson
Right.
in games against teams like Virginia in the NCAA tournament during his junior and senior years, where he would just in a tight game, hotly contested, one play can make all the difference. And Michigan State had the guy who can just go out there and get up a little higher and be a little stronger on the ball than everybody else. And Coen Carr is that kind of player.
So that brings us to five keys of the game brought to you by Nudge Printing. For those watching on YouTube, you can see my Final Fours on the schedule t-shirt. We have a bunch of Nudge Printing stuff at our house. We keep getting more. It lasts forever. So it's great stuff. Make sure you head on over. You get 20% off as a listener of the show if you type in Final Four, just as one word at checkout. So it's nudgeprinting.com. Huge selection of stuff, and they have the new line of the City Detroit stuff. So check out their cool hoodies and hats and more. All right. So the first key to the game was fresh versus warmed up. So this is always the classic. Is it helpful to have that first game under your belt? Is it better to sort of be, uh, you know, come off and with a long rest? Well, there was no signs of rust with Michigan State early. I think they jumped out to a quick 10-2 or 10-4 lead or 12-4 maybe. And then Oregon kind of got back in the game. So there's no sign that it really made any difference whatsoever. And if anything, by the second half, Oregon kind of looked worn down.
Yeah, I mean, the second half was a push. It was played
Yeah.
evenly. So it's hard to say that Oregon got completely worn out, but I do think it's fair to say that might have had something to do with why they were only able to make that push at the start of the second half and then could never really
Yeah.
put Michigan State under serious game pressure after that. I do think that's fair to say. But yeah, when we talked about you got to always mention this because it's a common talking point in these tournaments. But I think on in total, there really wasn't much of an advantage. Now, you know, spoiler alert, I think tomorrow that might start to change. Tomorrow is where I start to take this stuff a little more seriously because you are starting to talk about teams playing their third game in 3 days.
Hmm.
That's where I think energy becomes maybe more of a factor. Doesn't mean teams can't or don't overcome it, but it's a more worthy talking point than it was today.
Yeah, absolutely. Of course, Wisconsin, we'll talk about a little bit. They did have a fairly easy cruise in at the second half, and so they didn't have to exert a whole as much energy. So,
That's true. That's true.
yeah. All right. So the second key to the game was the boards. Michigan State did really great here in the boards. I had it written down. They had a 35% offensive rebounding rate. Oregon just 21.4%. second chance points were 16-4 in favor of Michigan State. So they definitely made some hay there. And that, I mean, that's the difference in the game right there, I suppose you could say.
Yeah, I think, this kind of felt a little bit like the syndrome I've talked about with regard to Michigan, where it's not as chronic a problem for Oregon as it's been for Michigan, but today it was an issue. When you're so short in scoring opportunities, that puts you behind the eight ball. You've got to go out and really get the job done in every other phase of the game if you're going to be that shy in scoring opportunities. So you look at this, it was what was it, +4 in rebounding and +3 in turnovers, right? So Michigan State was +7 in scoring chances.
Hmm.
In that kind of scenario, only quote unquote shooting 47% from the floor probably isn't going to be enough.
Yeah.
And it wasn't. But yeah, Michigan State did. As you said, it was a physical game. I mean, we talked about Oregon being more of a classic Pac-12 style team, but they really brought it from a physicality standpoint today, I thought, or at least they tried to. Uh, but it just wasn't enough.
Yeah. Certainly brought in that second half, I felt. That's really where
Yeah.
you kind of noticed it. So the third game of the team was key to the game was attack, and so that was mostly in the half court, certainly in fast break as well. In fast break, actually, Oregon had the edge, 15-9, and I felt like that was probably pretty accurate. There are a couple that allowed buckets that, like that Jaden Akins out that one steal had, but for the most part, Michigan State on the half court was really attacking well, and that was the difference you saw with Jeremy Fears. Like I'll be honest, I couldn't tell when Oregon was playing zone or coming out, going in and out of zone if they played a lot of zone because it didn't really seem to make any difference as far as Michigan State and their attack.
It and it can get a little confusing because Oregon, when they were zoning, they were playing a lot of matchup, which sometimes can look like it's just man with switching going
Hmm.
on, right?
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I'm glad you called out Jeremy because I wanted to mention something about that. I am, and I've thought he's been really good at creating contact all year long. He's exceptional at getting a defender on his back
Yes.
and keeping him there as he gets into the lane. That's good stuff. But going forward, the next few years of his career, he is going to be a guy that I think is going to drive opposing fan bases absolutely insane because I think he's going to be living at the free throw line.
Yeah.
He just has a knack for it, and he's strong enough sometimes to finish through it. He's definitely able to create contact and get himself to the line. Uh, but this was a really good performance from him. Overall, I mean, Oregon is not a team that fouls at a crazy high rate at all. MSU shot 29 free throws, and those weren't inflated by the end of the game. Oregon wasn't really in foul mode. Uh, Now that you'd hope they'd shoot better, that they'd cash in a little better than they did. Set only 17 for 29, but they more than doubled up Oregon's free throw attempts. So that aspect of it, creating contact, getting yourself to the line, that bit MSU did exceptionally well, and it really started with the guards.
And the next key to the game and the fourth key is zone. I guess there's not really much to talk about there. I don't think we saw it. If we did, it was really not
We
that,
did.
didn't make
They
much of a
did play
difference though.
some. They did play some, and they'll change defenses sometimes in the middle of a possession. As I say, sometimes when they're in matchup, it's tough to tell all the time if it's truly a matchup or if they're just in man and they're switching.
Hmm.
But I thought Michigan State, when Oregon was in zone, they attacked it really well. As you say, you're right in terms of calling attention to Jeremy, but also the other guards too. I thought penetration, getting into the gaps, was really great when they did play zone, and it forced Oregon to not be able to do it as much as they probably wanted to. That was the other thing. I thought they were very efficient against it.
And the
Let's
fifth
put
and
it this way:
oh,
when
good.
Michigan State had offensive lulls, it wasn't because of that. It was
Yes.
because of turnovers.
Yeah, exactly. And so then the fifth and final key to the game was the depth. And that was something that we saw. I mean, it's usual nothing really exceptional from Michigan State. It's just sort of their
Yeah.
usual thing. And then you saw, especially with some foul trouble, that Oregon really struggled, especially in the first half when Shellset left the floor. Even though he was kind of neutralized, he's definitely an important part of their offense, running it and then also on the defensive end as well.
Well, he still managed, even with that foul trouble, he still managed to play 34 minutes. I mean, they had
Right.
three guys at 34 or 35 minutes, and then Bartholomew at 29. That's a lot against Michigan State. And again, it wasn't the obvious thing that we've seen of late where MSU just drops the hammer against an opponent, but the nature of this game was different. I was talking with someone earlier who said, yeah, it was great to not have MSU down in the first half much, or down at halftime. That's become a fairly regular occurrence. And then we see the effect of their depth in the second half. This one was different that they had the 10-point lead at halftime. And as I say, I think the way it was measured in this one was more the fact that Oregon was really limited to only one push early in the second half. They just couldn't muster up another one.
Yeah, and so I guess the only other thing to talk about in the game was free throw shooting was very poor. I mean, everybody struggled from the line. I think Jace was
Yeah.
6 for 10. Jeremy, I don't, was he like 50% maybe?
No, he was a little better than that. He was what was he?
Was he
He
four
was
for
five
seven?
for eight, so he was
Yeah, I know
much
he missed the
better than
front end
that.
of at least one and one. Anyway,
Yeah.
they definitely had. It's funny this team when they have. It seems like they shoot 90% from the free throw line and 20% from behind the arc. And this game they shot 47% from behind the arc and barely better than that from the free throw line, but like 59% from the line.
Yeah, look, this is I'm not going to get hung up on it, but I will say, in terms of free throw accuracy, this is something that during this win streak has not been at the level that we've been used to seeing them shoot it for the bulk of the season, right? So again, I'm not panicked about it by any means, but you can recognize it and say, hey, this has got to improve.
Yeah, it didn't matter. I mean, had they hit their free throws at the rate we'd expect, this would have been about a 20-point game or pretty close
Right.
to it, right?
Exactly. And that's been the case actually during obviously this has been happening during a win streak against good opponents. So
Right.
they've been doing everything else well, but um it hasn't cost them yet. There might be a game coming up at some point over the next few weeks where it might cost them. So hopefully that's going to turn around.
Well, that brings us up to the next game. We'll talk about the next game opponent in the semifinals against the Wisconsin Badgers. They're actually the 5 seed, although here I have the 4 seed. But the Badgers are coming off a just annihilation of UCLA in their UCLA's first game in tournament. Wisconsin had to dispatch the who did they beat? I'm trying to remember now. Northwestern. They beat
Yep.
Northwestern pretty handily, but not in the fashion they did with UCLA today. I mean, they just pummeled UCLA.
Well,
The Badgers had what 19 uh, 3 pointers, which ties a Big Ten tournament record that was set
yeah.
by Iowa back when they played
I
Northwestern a few
couldn't
years ago.
believe I couldn't believe that didn't set the record. That's crazy.
Well,
That
I remember
19
I was at
makes
that
only
game with
yeah.
where Iowa scored 100 and some points against Northwestern.
Yep.
Uh, so
Look, it was impressive. I mean, they only won only by 16. That's a
right.
very flattering score to UCLA because Wisconsin was up 19 at the break, I believe, and I think it got as high as 27. And then UCLA made a little bit of a run to make it, semi-respectable. I'll admit to being surprised. I really thought UCLA was a bad matchup for Wisconsin because of the way they can defend, the physicality they play with. I mean, Wisconsin's basically an offense or bust team this year. Their defense isn't horrendous, but they don't win games against high-level opponents typically on the defensive end. It's about offense, and I thought UCLA would come in and and do a credible job, and they just didn't. And that's not. I'm not trying to downplay what Wisconsin did because Wisconsin had to make those shots. You go 19 for 32 in an open gym from three, and that's
Yeah.
pretty good. So credit to them, but UCLA was abysmal. in every respect. I mean, I was really shocked and frankly very disappointed in them because I've been very high on that team for most of the year, and I just thought they laid an egg. That was just a really bad. It was bad for. I haven't seen what Mick Cronin has to say, but I can't imagine he's happy about the effort. And again, that's not to downplay what Wisconsin did, but I just did not think UCLA came out and played anywhere close. You and I saw that team in person. When we saw them in Pauley Pavilion, that was not this,
Yeah.
you know, in any respect, but especially from an effort, energy, toughness respect. They made it very, very easy on Wisconsin. And if you make it easy on Wisconsin, you can get run out of the gym because they've got skilled guys. We've talked about it earlier this year. All five, basically anybody who ever sees the floor for Wisconsin is a shooting threat.
Right.
They don't play anybody who isn't. And so if you're going to make it easy on them, look out.
Yeah, I mean, I think with with UCLA, they've been sort of a Jekyll and Hyde kind of team. They were pretty good, and then they had that stretch where they were really bad. I mean, Michigan went in there, tattooed them for like beating by like 25 or something in Poly, and then they got on a big winning streak, and then they've sort of kind of come back to, and now they've gone the other way, I guess, this game. But it's just a one game blip. We'll see when the NCAA
Yeah,
tournament comes,
well,
I guess.
it's definitely given me some pause because I was set to. I mean, you got to see what the obviously what the matchups and the draw
Sure.
looks
Yeah.
like on Sunday, but I was feeling very good about that team because I was feeling very good about that team for this tournament because I thought they were the one team other than Michigan State that goes legit 10 deep. 10 guys, all of whom can play. It's not just nominally they run somebody out there for 4 minutes. And with their defense and their physicality and toughness, I really thought, well, that's the other team besides MSU that I think is best positioned to go try and win 3 games in 3 days, you know? And to just,
Yeah.
yeah, not impressive at all. And Mick Cronin's got to be very frustrated because he knows these guys have it in them to do what needs to be done, but he can't seem to find quite the level of consistency he'd want to. And again, it's not we're not talking about well, they just don't have shots dropping. It's not that kind of inconsistency. It's inconsistency in terms of energy and intensity as much as anything else.
Yeah. Well, so it'll be interesting with this Wisconsin game coming up. Just briefly, Wisconsin top 15 offense, as you saw exhibited today, top 25 in the nation in 3 point field goal attempts per field goal attempts. But today, I mean, they were really impressive. They actually have not had a great 3 point accuracy the last few games until today. So they were 29% in the previous 6 games leading up to this game where they shot. I don't even have it in front of me, but it had to been 60
19 for
plus.
32.
So well over 60%, right? I mean, uh,
Almost right at 60,
yeah. So
59.4.
yeah, I
Yeah.
think yeah, they were. I kept saying, turning my family, saying, "There's no chance they could keep this up," but I was obviously very wrong. They
But this
did.
is what I'm saying. And again, not to denigrate what Wisconsin did, but you were there.
Yeah.
How many of those shots, especially in the first half, seemed well contested?
I thought early, like Blackwell had a couple that were really
Yes,
pretty well
early.
contested, and then they hit those, and then it was kind of like then they were doubling either inside or they just as rotations. You're slow getting to whoever.
Yes.
And the problem with Wisconsin, as we've talked about before, is like you said, everybody's a shooter. So whenever you're rotating, I mean, you're continuously coming off someone can hit, whether it's your five guy Kroll or Tangier or Blackwell, Klesmit,
John Beeline. John Beeline made a really good comment after the game that I just watched. Or he said the problem with Wisconsin is because they've got all five of those guys at any time who can hit a shot, their spacing is very good, which
right?
is true. And then they're also very good rotating the ball side to side. And he says, in his mind, if you can get the ball side to side 6 times in a possession, you're almost certainly going to get a good shot against anybody.
Yeah,
And I didn't think Wisconsin had to go 6 times around the horn in this game. UCLA was breaking down basically with one swing of the ball frequently. But yeah, I mean, I'm looking right now as we're talking, they're running highlights. There's a lot of guys in red taking threes without anybody within 5 feet of them.
yeah, that was definitely the case.
And so that was, but again, you still got to make those shots. We've seen Michigan State miss those shots for a lot of this season, right?
Yeah.
So making them is a big deal, but I think it illustrates the point that I referenced earlier. If you're going to allow Wisconsin to play free and easy on offense, brother, it's going to be a long night because they will take advantage of that.
Well, and people
Have to
talk
make
about
it tough on them.
that first game in the Breslin where they played, that they had a lot of open shots as well. They hit. Now we both thought they were a little bit out of rhythm. They weren't quite as open.
I
They
didn't
certainly were not
think,
like
no,
today's kind of shots where they were
no,
just very
was not
comfortable.
like this. No, no, no,
Yeah.
no.
And then
They
you hit
did
a
not have
couple.
good looks.
You hit a couple, and then at this point, even when it's contested, it still goes in. They just start hitting everything. So contagious. So defensively for the Badgers, as you mentioned, they're not quite as good. They're outside the top 30 in on defense. They don't have any shot blocking presence really inside, despite having some really tall guys, both Kroll and Winter. But they limit. They're pretty good against twos, 60th, and kind of middle of the pack from there on out. They tend to give up threes a lot. They're top 40 in defensive rebounding, although they're not an offensive rebounding team. So profile, which didn't hurt them today because, of course, they were able to hit outside and and then UCLA started trying to play catch up and were just not able, didn't have quite the bodies to hit enough threes or whatever to keep pace.
Yeah, what was weird about this game, and this is damning in part of UCLA shooting too, but UCLA had 20 offensive rebounds in
Right.
that game. That's not something Wisconsin typically does. They're not a great defensive rebounding team. They're a very good one. That is something they can't afford to do against Michigan State. They'll get drilled if they're not better in that phase. I suspect they will be. Defensively, the deal with Wisconsin is I don't think they're a true pack line team. And pack line is a defensive approach, really first popularized by Dick Bennett who coached at Wisconsin, and then his son Tony really took it to more widespread national prominence. I wouldn't describe Wisconsin as a pure pack line team, but a lot of the principles are the same. And what it relies on is you try to have all five defenders more or less with a foot touching the lane. So what that means is you're creating a lot of physical traffic inside. You might be vulnerable to giving up threes, depends how well you can recover to shooters. But the idea is not just limit the effectiveness of shooting twos around the rim or in the lane, but even shot opportunities. And so that's a reason why the way Wisconsin clogs the lane is a reason why they're pretty effective. They're not, again, not great, but solid in terms of limiting opponent success from two, despite the fact that they don't really have any kind of rim protection, despite their size. Those guys are not shot blockers. So it's an approach that's generally worked reasonably well. I do think Wisconsin occasionally can be had off the dribble. I don't think their perimeter defenders are necessarily great. And we'll see what Michigan State's able to do with that. We'll return to that theme in a
Mm-hmm.
moment. But that's kind of the theme with Wisconsin is generally speaking, they're going to force you to take some twos you don't want to take, which means, mid-range jumpers, and they're going to rebound those misses at a pretty good clip. They might be a little bit vulnerable on the threes. They won't foul typically very much. They didn't in the first game against MSU. I think MSU only got 13 free throw attempts, so
Sounds right.
well below their seasonal average. So, that's the profile. This is basically the way I would describe Wisconsin is this. They are a team that in a high level game, they probably need to win it offensively.
Mm-hmm.
And that doesn't mean they have to go out and score 95 points to win, but it means they've got to be really efficient. Because in a high level game, I don't expect that they're going to be able to just turn people's water off very well. They're not that
Right.
kind of defense.
Well, a game like you mentioned, the 20 offensive rebounds they give up today, which is unusual for them. But when you shoot 60% from three and you shoot as high volume as they do, you can get away with a lot of things,
Covers
a
up a
lot of
lot of
mistakes,
sins, right?
right? I mean, that's
Yeah.
all it's all the game. All right, so we're gonna, since for interest of brevity, we're gonna forego the usual lineups. We talked about this actually just a couple games ago, so people hopefully remember who's on
Yeah, I
Wisconsin's
mean, just
team.
real quick, we mentioned, five guys at any
Right.
given time, all of whom can shoot. The primary scorers, John Tanji, who had a big game today after he's been not great
Yeah.
the last couple, and John Blackwell, the kid who played at Birmingham, Brother Rice,
Hmm.
very, very good player and was very good in the game in Breslin.
Yeah. And so, which will something will not be a surprise at all. Brought to you by the Brothers Just You Gutters. Player to keep in the gutter for Wisconsin is,
John Tanji,
yeah, no,
who was the
yeah,
same choice in the first game. And
yeah.
I mentioned, I thought it was possible that Blackwell would go off playing at home, more or
Hmm.
less, and he did. But MSU really, really made John Tanji inefficient. And he's the primary guy.
Yeah.
He's just such a great three-level scorer. They put the ball in his hands a lot. He's strong. He's skilled. I mean, he's got everything you want in a power wing, and it's going to be a challenge yet again. They rose to the challenge the first time. Can they do it again?
Well, it's just like the NCAA tournament. After you get past maybe one or two games, at this point, you got to play good basketball to get to win six, right? I mean, it's
Absolutely.
it's not
You're
like
not playing any
you don't get
bums
days off, right? Maybe the first
in
game, about it.
in this Big Ten tournament. From this point out, no bums.
Yeah, exactly.
Everybody's good.
So then we go to Who Cleans the Glass Best, brought to you by the Squeegee Squad of Grand Rapids. As I mentioned previously, I'm down 17 to 10. I need to win all eight of the remaining games, hopefully, in order to catch you. You get to pick first this time, which would be interesting to see who you
Jack
pick.
Jackson Kohler in the bounce back.
Yeah, he always seems to have a struggle when I have him as the first pick, and then yeah, I can hear
I'm looking for about 15 boards
yeah,
at this point.
no sympathy from you. Yeah, so I'll go with
He had
Cooper.
the huge game in the first one, right? Didn't he
Right?
have? I think
Yeah,
it was 16.
when you
Yeah,
had
I'm
Cooper,
going
yeah,
with
when you had
Jackson.
him, and it didn't matter who I picked. So, all right, so I'll go with Cooper and Carr just to stay present, just because I expect Carr to have another big game. He seems like he's kind of ratcheted things up. We'll see if he maintains it for the next game as well.
Uh, Playing a Wisconsin team that takes a lot of threes, I'm counting on some long rebounds. I'm going to
Yep.
go with Jace Richardson.
Okay. And that brings us to five keys of the game brought to you by Nudge Printing. Head on over to Nudge Printing to get 20% off of your order if you just type in Final Four as one word at checkout. And so the keys of the game are energy. So game in 3 days for Wisconsin. They're warmed up. And then Michigan State, of course, coming off this their first game. So is there potentially an edge there, especially with Michigan State's depth?
Yeah, and I think this is the point that it's fair to talk about depth and energy and fatigue and all of that stuff. You made a good point though. The break that Wisconsin's got is that this was a laugher.
Yeah.
So Tanji played 28, Blackwell played 27. None of their other starters played more than 20. Gilmore had 22 off the bench, but that's pretty good. So you don't know how much of an impact that will have the 3 games in 3 days. But this is the point that I think it's fair to start talking about this when you've got teams that are facing that situation. Michigan State should be fine. I mean, I have to look at the minute distribution, but it feels like it was pretty good in this one. Nobody got pushed beyond the brink,
Right.
of what would normally be
If they did, it
uh,
was a mistake because they
the
had no reason
plane.
to.
Right. So I I think you could say small advantage Michigan State, but probably the bigger thing is just what we've been talking about on a game in game out basis down the stretch when it wasn't about 3 games in 3 days for the opponents. More about that 40 minutes that having to play against Michigan State with their physicality and their pace. And again, remember, this is not your old style Wisconsin team. They're middle of the pack in terms of pace, which for them means they look like West Head Loyola Marymount. Uh, so, will there be an impact in the last, say, 5 minutes, 7 minutes, 8 minutes, 10 minutes? Will we see an advantage for Michigan State in that way? Because we pretty consistently have throughout, especially throughout the last couple months of the season.
All right. So the second key of the game
Oh,
is
but
the.
one
Oh,
more
go
quick
ahead.
point on that though. One thing to note Wisconsin is a little better off than they were in the first game in that they have Max Klesmit
Right.
back.
Yeah. And
So,
we when we first did it, we didn't know he was a game time decision sort of.
right. And he sat out their last couple games. He played 20 minutes today. Wasn't very effective. He only had 3 points. He was 1 for 7 from the floor. So at this stage, it's less about, and he played against Northwestern as well. It's less about the tangible contributions he's making per se. I mean, he could have a good game, but it's not even so much about that as much as it's lengthening that rotation.
Yeah, exactly. So the second key to the game is the boards. Michigan State obviously elite, both ends of the floor. Ohio or Wisconsin is not a good offensive rebounding team, so we wouldn't expect a big difference there. We had a pretty big separation between the two teams at the Breslin Center. Wisconsin's a pretty good defensive rebounding team, so it'll be a question whether Michigan State can, with an energy standpoint, maybe Carr making some plays that other people can't make. That gives them a little bit of edge here.
Yeah. You don't, I mean, it would be very surprising and very disappointing to see Wisconsin get much done on its offensive glass because they don't emphasize it, and Michigan State is an elite defensive rebounding team. Where there's the question is Michigan State's very, very, very good offensive rebounding against Wisconsin's very good defensive rebounding. Michigan State is a little better statistically in the comparison here in that area, but can they turn that into an actual production advantage? It matters too because you would expect, given the profile of these two teams, for Wisconsin to have a little bit of an advantage in terms of turnovers. So you want to have a corresponding advantage on the glass. So again, as we talk about a lot, you're not finding yourself on the short end of scoring chances.
Absolutely. So third key to the game is maybe the most obvious is defending, especially after watching the barrage that UCLA got today, but defending the arc against Wisconsin, who is averages, I think almost, was it over 50% of their field goal attempts are from three. So they definitely heavily
Right
emphasize
around
that.
there.
Yeah.
Top 25 team nationally. They shoot more of them than Illinois does on a percentage basis, if you can believe that. And as you mentioned, they've been going through a run after they've been very good most of the year. Their last 6 games coming into this one, they were at 29% from three. So just as we've spent a lot of the season talking about with Illinois, that's a problem. If it's that big a part of your offense and
Right.
you're shooting that poorly, that's an issue. It's why I think, and I understand it, but it's part of the reason why I think a lot of the national types who have obsessed over Michigan State's 3 point shooting percentage, besides the fact that they've been significantly better in Big Ten play, but they've really missed the boat, not even because of that, but mostly because it's just not been a big part of what they do. They don't take a lot of them. So if
Right.
you don't take a lot of them, how much does it matter? I'm not saying it doesn't matter at all. It's an important weapon to have that you can go to. But Michigan State's had an entire season of demonstrating to you that they can win without the three being a major component of what they do. Well, Wisconsin, it is a major component. So it would be like us saying, I don't think Michigan State needs to rebound offensively very well. Oh, it matters. It's a core principle. For Wisconsin, this team, 3 point shooting matters. I mentioned earlier, I was very surprised to see how passive UCLA was defending the three in this game because there was one team other than Michigan State that I felt was equipped to press up on Wisconsin and really take away most of their chances at good looks. They didn't do that. Maybe they did it early, as you say, but um, after the first few minutes, they were really lax.
Yeah.
Michigan State cannot do that. They have to do what they did at Breslin. They got to press up. You might give up an occasional back cut. Wisconsin's a very good passing team. They may make you pay for that, but I think you have to commit to doing everything you can to limit the three. I just think it's that simple. If Wisconsin is not hurting you from three, it gets very difficult for them to win. Now, that doesn't mean they got to go 19 for 32 to hurt you, but they've got to be better than they were at Breslin. That's for sure.
Yeah.
And if Michigan State can limit the good looks, I'll take my chances.
Fourth key to the game is getting into the paint. This is something that Michigan State needs to do anyway because they don't rely heavily on the 3-point shot, but also from a fouling standpoint, try and maybe get some people in foul trouble too for Wisconsin. Get to the line.
I think you saw it in the Oregon game. What was the real difference? Is I mean, Oregon didn't shoot the three well at all, but
No.
and Michigan State did. But to me, the really key thing was Michigan State's guards were just getting into the paint a lot, and we know that's been an equation for them all season long. So I would expect it to continue in this game if Michigan State is to win it. It has to continue. I think, as we say, Wisconsin does a pretty good job of limiting success against twos. I look back at the numbers from the Breslin game. Even in a win, Michigan State was only 44% on their 2-point attempts
Hmm.
against Wisconsin. So, that tells some of this, and they didn't get to the line a lot. They only shot 13 free throws. So Wisconsin was pretty effective in limiting that stuff. I do think Michigan State will want to be better in this game in those two areas. And most of that starts with the guards getting downhill, getting into the lane, putting that defense under pressure.
Well, and that just uh, goes right into our fifth and final key to the game. It's the easy points. This is Michigan State free throws, making them, not only getting them, but making them, and also transition as much you get in transition as possible against the team before their defense has a chance to set up.
Yeah, I think when you're talking about high level games, and this would qualify, you're talking about a team, Michigan State, that probably it's hard to see them falling below the 2 line now,
Hmm.
having
Yeah,
won today.
I think so.
Wisconsin winning these 2 games has done a lot to solidify themselves as a 3 in my book. I mean, we'll see what we get on Sunday, but the point is these are 2 high level teams. So this qualifies as that kind of game.
Right.
So when you're trying to figure out what separates teams in a game like that, I mentioned sometimes it's having that 99th percentile guy who can go out and make a play nobody else can. But another thing you look at is how many easy points are you able to get? And so by easy points, you're talking primarily about free throws and transition baskets. You could throw putbacks on offensive rebounding in there as well, although I don't think those are necessarily as easy because you got to typically work to get the offensive rebound.
Right.
In a game where you expect it to be difficult, you don't expect either team to have an easy ride, right? So whatever you can get that is relatively easy, boy, that's going to be golden. And if one team can carve out an advantage there, that might be enough.
All right. Well, we're going to wrap it up there so I can get to the final session of the day here and watch Illinois and Michigan do some hate watching here in Indianapolis. Uh, and again, just as you make sure you head on over to our support page at tffinots.com/support. There you can find our great sponsors. The Brothers Adjust Your Gutters, 10% off. You mentioned Final Four. Squeegee Squad of Grand Rapids, 15% if you mention Final Four. And Nudge Printing, we get 20% off your order if you just type in Final Four at the checkout. You can also find ways to support a show through recurring